All right, we are going to go over Soviet Kingdom's BGH article here. All right, I have not read any of this. I read like the first paragraph and I was like, you know what? I should do this on a stream. I think that would make a lot more sense. So I don't really know what it's about, but somebody pinged me. I didn't even know you had put it out. Somebody pinged me a couple days after you released it, and they were like, hey, what are your thoughts on this? And I was like, oh, I didn't know he did that. We should check it out on stream. So here we are. Obviously, I'll give my own input as we go. In the world of Team StarCraft, there are three broad communities. Fastest map with its stacked minerals and oodles of geysers. Low money, mostly played on 4-player 1v1 maps. I'll throw hunters in here as well. And in between these two extremes lies BGH. BGH stands for Big Game Hunters, and it's essentially just hunters, but with more resources. BGH is often regarded by the ignorant as a Protoss playground where 60 APM guys in the chat go to mindlessly mass zealots, cannons, and carriers. Bad Terrans go to build walls with holes in them, and bad Zergs go to make creep colonies that will never grow up. True, though. Actually true. There actually is such a misconception about BGH players. Anybody who's played a few public BGH games knows this is perfectly accurate, but when decent players play BGH, there's actually quite a bit of strategy and skill required to consistently win. Even teams of very strong 1v1 players can lose a lot to experienced BGH teams, as we saw ourselves the other day. We played against two A-rank players and an S-rank player, like ladder players. And they played against me, Hollywood, and Soviet Kingdom. And we beat them, I think it was SK, right? We beat them, I think it was 16-0 or 12-0, something like that. So it's actually funny because when we played those games, they genuinely couldn't understand like what was going wrong. I was in a call with them like on and off. I joined between games, and they were saying things like they were like starting to argue and get upset. And one guy said something like, "We're like LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, and we're losing to a high school basketball team." Like they genuinely could not understand what the problem was. A couple of them couldn't. Hawk actually, I feel like, had a pretty good grasp on things, but, you know, just for non-BGH players, I didn't realize that the actual amount of depth that goes into it and how micro-intensive BGH really is. But I genuinely think that a lot of my BGH experience genuinely helped with my ladder, because one thing that I learned how to do is handle, like, niche situations, right? Which a lot of ladder is niche. When it came to, like, the more, like, you know, information-based gameplay on ladder, like 1v1s, that kind of thing, I definitely struggled, like, hardcore. But as far as, like, niche situations or, like, some of the micro-intensive stuff, I was always experienced in that kind of thing because of BGH. Alright. So anyway, even teams of very strong 1v1 players can lose a lot to experienced BGH teams if they haven't previously been exposed to all the depraved tactics experienced BGH players use to win. This will hopefully be a multi-part series where I will use data from a curated data set of roughly 11,500 games between relatively skilled players to answer a few questions about BGH. Since 3v3 is the most popular and my favorite form of BGH team play, the remainder of this post will be dedicated to analyzing 3v3. In part 1, we're going to try to use data to answer the oft-debated question, what is the most powerful composition in 3v3 BGH? Let me get some, what do you guys think before we continue? What do you guys think is the strongest composition for BGH in 3v3? I want to hear some guesses. I don't even remember what my guesses are. Let me actually double check, because he asked me this a while ago. No, not unit composition, but race composition. Whichever one that has the most Protoss. Oh, Jin. Let me look up my answers real quick, because SK asked me this a while ago, and I don't remember what I said. And he didn't tell me the answer. So I guessed ZPP. I was thinking ZPP is probably the best. And then he asked me, what do I think their best and worst matchups are, excluding Triple Terran? And I said PPZ's worst would be against PPT, and their best would be against TZZ. But this was including lower ranked games, so it's a little bit hard to think about that, because like I'm thinking on like a higher level. If you're including lower level stuff, it gets a little bit harder for me to think about. In this context, composition refers to the races played by a particular team, usually referred to by the first letter of each race. For example, 2 Protosses and a Terran would be PPT. Right? So the rest of this article assumes a novice level understanding of both Brood War and BGH. All data is taken from the wonderful Rep Mastered app. Disclaimer. For each of the claims I'm going to present, there's an ocean of caveats and yes buts. In particular, spawn locations play a huge role in determining the outcome of any individual game. So true. Actually, so true. To keep this article from turning into a novel, I'm going to ignore spawns and just look at how each composition performs in general, averaged over all spawns in the dataset. Spawn-specific analysis will come in a future article. I think that's good. I think that's really good, actually, because there's so many, like, so many spawn compositions, because it matters, like, which race goes where as well, on top of the composition overall, that if you did all of that, and, like, you try to cut it all up by that, it would be so much information. And that's the thing about BGH. For BGH players, like, we've been playing for 20 plus years, a lot of us, and that's like how long it took to get used to all the potential, like, combinations basically, and like how to play them. And even then, I wouldn't say that we're amazing at it, right? It's the depth of BGH goes pretty hard. All right, here's the map layout, but you guys should pretty much know about that by now. Before we dive into the data, it's worth pointing out a few important features of the map. If you've played a lot of BGH before, you can probably skip this part. We're going to go over it anyway for the sake of, yeah, just covering everything. There's over 20,000 ways to distribute 6 players on BGH, by the way. Yeah, that's kind of what I mean. Like I've probably played 20,000 games of BGH. All right, the center. BGH largely follows a hub and spoke model where every main base opens into a natural expansion and outlets to the center of the map, with some notable exceptions. More on that later. It's impossible for many of the spawns to interact with each other via land without passing through the center. This makes controlling the center extremely important for one simple reason. The team that controls the center can combine their armies while simultaneously preventing the other team from doing so. This means that even if the other team has a significantly higher supply, the team that holds mid can reliably force 1v2, 1v3, or 2v3 fights and trade very efficiently as a result. Many high-level BGH games end after one battle for the center in the early game, and the losing team preferring to just GG rather than try to come back. Yeah, this is all very accurate, which I expect from SK. I mean, he's an intelligent guy, so yeah, this is all 100% true. There are ways to fight against people at the center, but you typically have the disadvantage, especially if you're getting blocked off, that kind of thing. We all kind of know about that. Like Canada and that kind of thing. Yeah, I had one account. My original account was, I want to say around 12,000 wins, not counting losses. So I've definitely played well over 20,000 games by now of BGH. No way it's 20k, is it? It's hard to imagine, huh? It doesn't sound right to me the more I thought about it. But I don't know the formula for it, but it's just like, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, that doesn't sound right. Eight spawn locations, 3v3, 3 possible races, yeah, for each individual player. Okay, actually, maybe it is 20,000. Okay, I'm actually kind of believing it a little bit now. Alright, Eyes confirmed it. I believe you now, SK. Pretty wild to think about, actually. In addition to the shared chokes noted above, 1 and 3 have an extremely short rush distance and multiple paths to reach the center. In fact, all of the top spawns plus 3 o'clock can reach each other by land without passing through the center. And yeah, we're talking about this little path right here. So there's all of this right here that kind of connects everything outside of the center, whereas everything on this side doesn't really have that. You know, you got this shared choke here. Travel distance, like he's saying, extremely long from down here, extremely long from here. Typically, your army sim city is going to be around in here, so this is pretty short. And then, yeah, you got this connecting to, like, go around and set up, like, flanks or maybe, like, bypassing the mid, that kind of thing. That's what we're talking about here. Shared chokes. There are 2 pairs of spawns that share a single entrance to the center of the map. There are 11 and 12 and 6 and 7. Furthermore, there is a path between these spawns that does not pass through the center, and the player 11 or 7 must go past 12 or 6 respectively to reach the center. Combine that with extremely short rush distances between these bases and you get a very interesting dynamic. If the shared players are on opposite team, they always end up fighting each other, while if they're on the same team, they can relatively easily combine their armies and block their chokes without having to pass through the center. Huge skill gap between two shared players in opposite teams or two strong allies sharing a choke can often decide a game. So true. Sometimes you see a weak teammate shared with a strong enemy, and you're just like, alright, should we just GG now? No ramps, no high ground, no mercy. This is a huge... Okay, what we're about to talk about here is another massive difference between BGH and really like any of like the low money 2v2s and stuff like that. Now, I know there are some rampless 2v2s maps, but it's still typically a closed off choke, whereas BGH has a lot of variety in the kind of chokes that you have. But the no ramp thing is huge, like absolutely huge. There's no high ground anywhere on the map, other than like the corners, but that's not really used. Unlike many low-money maps, BGH bases are not on high ground and have a very wide entrance. Combine this with short rush distances and the threat of double, triple teams, and it can often be very tricky to secure your choke. This is particularly a problem for Terran, who simultaneously have the weakest early game unit and the most incentive to wall off their choke. Additionally, the plus size mineral line and wide open terrain means that players who don't try to wall have a huge amount of area they need to protect in the event of an attack. Putting it all together, we can start to get a sense of the most powerful way to play on BGH. Teamwork, mobility, and aggression are the unholy trinity of high-level BGH. Let's see how these ideas impact the three races. I like this so far. This is a good breakdown of BGH. Alright, race summary. First, let's compile some summary metrics for each race individually. We'll start by looking at each race in isolation, and then we'll look at pairs of races, for example, PVZ, PPT, but not triple P. Triplets, and then we'll put in it all together to see how each composition performs in totality. For each of these parts of the analysis, we will exclude a mirror matchup, since mirrors by definition skew win rates towards 50%. First, let's get a feel for how each race performs in isolation. Ask me how surprised I am that Zerg has the highest win rate. I'll say Terran's win rate is exactly what I expected. How surprised are you? I'm not surprised. Not surprised at all. There's a few reasons for that, because even at low level... So here... Okay, let me explain why. So there's two reasons I think Zerg has a high win rate, right? Both at high level and low level. At high level, okay, we all know, a high level Zerg going 9 pool guarantees safety and map control, unless you're against other Zergs, right? But even then, it still guarantees safety. So like if you have a Terran on your team, but you have a Zerg, and say they have 2 Zergs and your Zerg can't really, you know, stop and cancel their Zerg completely, he still has that presence that does not allow them to commit to an attack anymore. Then at low level, a 9 pool is just going to kill the bad players. Straight up. Happens all the time. They just won't survive the 9 pool. Alright, so looking at this, it's going to break it down for us. Protoss is by far the most played at 45.2% of plays, followed by Zerg at 30%, and Terran at 24.6%. However, contrary to popular belief that BGH is a Protoss map, it is in fact Zerg that wins the most often in 3v3 with a 56.6% win rate compared to Protoss at 50.9%. Terran is a distant third at 40.2%. That's quite a difference. I love the excitement here. What's going on here? Basically, it comes down to each race's early game unit. Absolutely. 100%. Early game in BGH is everything. It's not everything, but it's a lot of the game. Zerg's basic unit is the Zergling, which becomes available very early, is very cheap, and has a speed upgrade that can reliably be researched extremely early. In the hands of a skilled player, Speedlings are very powerful in the early game. Their extreme mobility essentially guarantees Zerg-heavy teams early game map control, providing many opportunities for ganks. In high-level games, it is very common for early game Zergling aggression to decide a game in the first few minutes. Protoss also has a powerful early game on BGH. I assume we're going to talk about cannons too, right? Surely. Though less so than Zerg. The Zealot is tanky and relatively cheap, but it's also slow. Speedlings run circles around them, but the many narrow corridors on BGH means that once Protoss can get 5 Zealots or more out, they can sometimes force decent trades even versus large number of Lings. Doing so, however, requires the Protoss to be very careful, lest they get surrounded and wiped out. Protoss can also quickly get photon cannons, which can be used both offensively and defensively, and in some situations, Dragoons. Zealots also combine extremely well with Zerglings and Marines, soaking up lots of damage while the Lings and Marines deal free damage. So, yeah, basically all we're talking about here is, you know, just Zealots combined with Lings. So, like, if you have, like, 10 Lings versus 10 Lings, but you throw in that one Zealot to help your 10 Lings, then it's an absolute massacre in your favor. Like, it's not even close. So Zealots actually turn into like really good support units for your team. But Zerg also kind of like supports the Protoss, especially if you're getting map control and you get cannons up to like block and stuff like that, right? So it's actually funny because it's like Zerg controls the game early, and then Protoss kind of becomes the support role in a way to the Zerg so that they can get control. Or, you know, like you said, sometimes you do get situations where you get to go Dragoons and you're just being fully supported by your team, which is, in my opinion, is my favorite thing. I absolutely love making Dragoon if the turn rate's good. Terran, by contrast, poor Terran, is by far the weakest early on. The Marine is cheap, and the only basic unit with a ranged attack, but is also slow, easily killed, and has a low DPS. In a straight-up fight with Zealots and Speedlings, unupgraded Marines typically get massacred, especially in low numbers. Combine that with the short rush distances, and Terrans often find themselves facing very strong Zealot-ling attacks before they can even have time to build more than a few Marines. Many a BGH game ends on the spot with a Terran getting his wall busted and dying 4 minutes into the game. Even if Terran survives the early game, it often gets blocked in by offensive cannons or bunkers, forcing the team to play 2v3 until the Terran can get tanks, or in a fight to break out guerrilla style. During that time, one of the Terran's unfortunate teammates will often be brutally gang murdered, forcing the Terran's remaining ally to play 2v3 for the rest of the game. Very, very accurate. Another common thing that didn't get mentioned here is it's even worse than that, right? Like, Terran gets blocked in, then they have to go for tanks, and then typically if they're getting cannoned in, Protoss is also going straight into DTs to make it where when Terran finally bust out, they still can't come out on the map. It's so frustrating playing Zerg or Terran and BGH sometimes. There are like some like really niche options, like you can do like offensive like 8 racks walling in people and stuff like that, but it's hard and not reliable. For a bit more detail on how this plays out in practice, we can look at a duration chart which shows each race's win percentage as a function of game duration, indexed to a 50% win rate. This means a value of 0 would indicate exactly a 50% win rate, and anything above or below indicates a positive or negative win rate, respectively. Man, poor Terran, huh? So Protoss actually starts to fall off, huh? In the late game. This actually puts it really well into perspective how middle of the road Protoss is. It's really about how good Zerg is early and how bad Terran is early. It's actually crazy. Alright, Protoss has by far the most consistent graph, never deviating more than 5% from 50% for any game length. This seems to indicate that Protoss is a very good all-arounder in BGH, being able to contribute meaningfully in the early game with mass Zealots and Cannons, in the mid game with Dragoons, Speed, Zealots, Dark, Templar, and Robo units, and in the late game with a strong economy and powerful spellcasters, like Storm and Recall. Also Stasis if you want to just never die because of these god-awful chokes. If you're 11 and 12 with Stasis, you're immortal. Terran, by contrast, suffers brutally in the early game, losing huge numbers of short games and not climbing above a 45% win rate until 10 minutes. Note that even though Terran has arguably the strongest BGH mid-game, they still never reach a 50% win rate until 26 minutes. This is because even Terrans who can get cleanly into the mid-game often still have to play from behind, since their team has to play 2v3 for several minutes and is usually taking a lot of damage. Most of my Terran wins, not most, a lot of my Terran wins, and this is just how it is for Terran. Terran, don't get the wrong idea, right? Terran's early game is really bad, and like this makes it appear that they're really bad all around. So, kind of what Soviet's talking about. Terran's so bad early that his teammates are getting screwed, but when you get into mid game, Terran is like ungodly strong on BGH. You're just at a disadvantage. That's the problem. So a lot of these wins you're seeing around this mark is Terran winning with a dead teammate. That's what these wins are. It's not that they're weak anymore, it's just that they don't have help anymore. Like a lot of times, like if you're against like double Zerg or something, you get out with a big bio ball or something and your teammate's dead. Zerg can't stop you with Lings at all. They have to have been able to tech, and it kind of comes down to like how well did your teammates survive, how long did they survive, how much did they kill, that kind of thing. Because the longer you survive when you have a Terran teammate, the weaker the Zergs are going to be because they have to keep making Lings to make sure you die. And this like exponentially scales your Terran up into the mid game. That's why dying slowly is a very important skill. The Zerg chart is basically the mirror opposite of Terran, winning a hilarious 70% of 3-minute games and staying well above 50% until the 10-minute mark, where the lack of economy starts to become a serious problem. However, even in these 10 to 15-minute games, Zerg win rates are still positive, as they've often gained enough of an advantage in the early game to survive even in a low economy. Yeah, Zerg kind of becomes like such a support role. Pretty much the whole game, actually, there's a support role. unless you play it the way I do and your teammates are pissed at you all the time. But I have more fun, okay? Alright, double race summary. What is this? Oh, like PP. Okay, I see. Yeah, double Terran's gonna be a freaking nightmare, dude. It's the worst. I want to quit every time I get double Terran. Alright, so for play count, double Terran is the lowest at 12.3. Double toss, yeah. I mean, a lot of people are picking pro toss. Win percentage, once again, as expected. Double Terran way down there. Double Zerg, very, very high. It's because double Zerg is guaranteed control. The only time double Zerg is not guaranteed control is when you're against another double Zerg. What did I say? Did I say PPZ? Because now I want to go back to ZZP. I did say PPZ. I think... Okay, that's what I said. I said my guess would be either ZZP or ZPP. You told me to pick one, and I settled on PPZ. Alright, the double race numbers follow a similar trend as singles, but more extreme. Double Protoss wins a shade under 52% of the time, but double Zerg goes from 55 to an even more muscular 59.5. Meanwhile, double Terran wins a miserable 27.8% of the time, which, I'll be honest with you, might be higher than I expected. It's hard out there for a Terran. Somewhere in the world, Artosis is smashing a keyboard and Vindication. Double Zerg's dominance is easy enough to explain. Having two Zergs going 9 full speed essentially guarantees map control. Unless the other team also has double Zerg, that's literally what I just said. Skilled Zergs can turn BGH into a post-apocalyptic hellscape with massive packs of rabid lings prowling the map and devouring any army foolish enough to move out too early. Meanwhile, the Terran Protoss and their team is free to tech the mech or goons, respectively, which gives them much-needed beef to the mass Zergling army. Doubling all-ins with Goon Vulture tanks aboard are a contender for deadliest build in all of StarCraft. Dude, look, this is ridiculous. This is so funny. Dude, double Zerg, man. It's actually worse than I thought it was. I knew it was good, but like, holy dude. They actually win later, huh? I guess that makes sense, actually, because typically if you get later and later with double Zerg, it means you didn't die in the mid-game, and then they're getting to their like high tech and their macro and stuff is kicking it, so that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah, this is like more or less what I expected to see. For Terran, I knew it was like this. I did not realize, like, it didn't occur to me until I'm looking at it now and thought about it, that this actually makes a lot of sense. Like, Zerg wins the early game a lot. Double Zerg crushes early game, as expected. There is that vulnerability mid-game, like I was just talking about, right? Where they're low eco, low tech, like armies are small, that kind of thing. So they're not really scary, but then as it goes on... This dip is very interesting to me, though. This actually is very interesting to me, because I would have thought it'd be like a steady, like up and up from here. I'm kind of wondering what this is. What is this moment here? Around the 25-minute mark. Why 20 minutes? I would have thought like closer to like 15. Probably just noise. Okay, that would make... Yeah, okay. That can make sense then. Because like, I would expect to see a dip like this. Like here, this dip makes sense, right? To me, this makes sense because, you know, your early game's like super strong. As it goes on, Zerg does fall off. And then this to me is like, hey, our mech player is like really strong right now. And then I'm like, and then this would be, okay, well, our mech player didn't kill anybody. And now we're going to lose again. But now Zerg is getting strong again. Like, that's what this is to me. I think this makes sense. This could just be noise, like you said. That would actually make a lot of sense. This is as expected. Terran sucks, Terran sucks, Terran sucks. And then, yeah, it's pretty much the same thing, just more extreme again. Looking at the duration charts, we again see more extreme versions of single trends. Double Protoss breaks even for the first 7 minutes or so, then has a nice spike from 7 to 15 minutes and a mixed bag after the 15-minute mark. Double Terran loses most of its games in the first 10 minutes and doesn't really manage to reach equality even in longer games. Double Zerg is the mirror opposite, winning most of the games in the first 10 minutes, breaking even from 10 to 15 as their opponents start to outscale them, and then doing quite well in 15+ minute games when things like high economy, mass meat, and high tech... Yeah, exactly. Triple race summary. Man, triple Terran wins 20%? That to me is really high. Like, surprisingly high. 113 games. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Alright, triple race games are quite rare in high-level BGH, occurring in only 7% of the games, with triple toss making the vast majority of that. Given how strong double Zerg is, you might think triple Zerg would be unstoppable, but this is not the case. While ZZP and ZZT combined for over a 59% win rate, ZZZ has below a 49% win rate, only about 1% higher than PPP. This highlights the shortcoming of Zerg on BGH that I've avoided mentioning until now, because Zerg must choose between making workers and units, and because map control is so important on BGH, Zerg usually spend all their larvae on units rather than drones early on. If the Zergs can't get a quick kill, their speedlings and low economy scale very poorly into the mid-game. This is why having a Protoss turn on the team is so important. Their large economy and beefier units provide them extra muscle needed to break heavily fortified enemy bases, or if that's not feasible, they can use their higher tech army to buy time for the Zergs to drone up and play a longer game. As we would expect, Triple Terran gets mercilessly barbecued, winning only 20.4% of the games. Ouch. I did win a triple Zerg game last night, but I was against Flowers, so I don't know if it counts. And the best composition is... Let's put it all together and see if we can find the most powerful race composition on BGH. Double Zerg seems overpowered, but triple Zerg is just okay. That means ZZP and ZZT must be the best, right? Let's take a look. We'll start by simply calculating the aggregate non-mirror win rate for each composition. What is this? Non-mirror win percentage. PPZ is the highest win rate at 60.4 or 64.2%. Isn't that interesting? PPZ at 61, TZZ 56. Yeah, the triples we knew were low. Dude, poor double Terran. Just poor Terran in general, man. It's so sad for double Terrans. Just Terran in general. You know what that means? That means I'm right then, yeah? Am I right? Is there more to this, or am I just right? What? You just wrote a mini essay about how ZZX goes to the moon on BGH, only to rug pull and tell me PPZ wins the most often? Yes, indeed. Never trust anything you read on the internet. Figure out what's going on here. There's one last piece of the puzzle we need. The time has finally come to look at individual matchups. First things first, how many possible matchups are there? There are 10 unique compositions possible for each team in 3v3. Since there are 2 teams, that makes 10 times 10, 100 possible matchups. However, 10 of these are mirrors, PTZ versus PTZ, for example, and half their remaining non-mirror duplicates. PPZ versus TZZ is the same as TZZ versus PPZ after all, of course. That leaves 45 unique non-mirrors plus the 10 mirrors for a total of 55 possible matchups. To help us visualize such a large number of matchups as easily as possible, I'm going to display the data in the form of a matrix. Each cell in the matrix will contain 2 numbers, the matchup win rate, and the number of games played for that matchup. Any matchup with fewer than 30 total games played will be grayed out, as will mirrors. Any matchups without at least 1 game played will be blank. Each matchup will be shown twice in the matrix, once for each side of the matchup. Winning records are highlighted in green and losing records in red. Alright, let's see. So mirrors grayed out, obviously. So PPZ has a very low win rate against triple toss. I knew this, right? I didn't know this. When people are picking PPZ, the best thing you can do, I always said this. I said this in the Chinese games that I played. When people pick PPZ, the best thing to do is pick triple toss and all 3 go triple gate. It just completely overwhelms them. Really good against PPT, I knew that. PTT, of course, PTZ. So it actually does bad against TZZ, but I wouldn't even say bad, pretty much even, huh? Would I've expected that has a even record against TZZ, slightly less than 50. Trying to think of how that makes sense in my head. I guess double Zerg gets control, and then I guess mech, right? It's just that mech is too strong. Yeah, spawns also make a huge difference, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's part of it. Like, a lot of these numbers that are close, we do have to remember that we're not talking about spawns, right? I do kind of keep forgetting about that. Yeah, an isolated Terran is bad in all situations, no matter what. So anytime Terran is, like, in a corner by themselves away from their team, win rate's gonna drastically drop naturally. Yeah, so a lot of these things that are like kind of close like this, yeah, we can easily chalk it up to spawns, especially these with like low numbers, right? Yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense. Like vultures will be very, very strong in those situations. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Like vulture, very, very strong. Also, one of the Zergs can get to Buta like relatively easily. Triple Zerg actually does good against triple toss. It's kind of surprising. Okay, so I think against triple toss it makes sense because it's very easy to kill a toss with a double 9 pull. You don't even need all 3 Zergs to do it. So you can kind of kill a player and have his Zerg go macro, even. I think the reason it would be bad against PTT is because Protoss is going to naturally just go straight into defensive mode. Like, when you're this matchup, anytime you're playing double Terran, you're going to play a super defensive game. Zerg typically is going to open Lings. So you're just already set up defensively, so I think this kind of makes sense. Again, it's a low number, like a low count of games, right? But I still think this makes sense, because defensive play is going to be triple Zerg the most. If you have something like PPP, you're not thinking of being defensive. So I think this makes a lot of sense. And then I think with a Zerg on the other team as well, like the Zerg can easily cancel out defensive, like can help his players survive, basically. Okay, cool stuff. What is Triple Terran best against? PPZ at 19.6%. Solid. I'd like to see more Triple Terran versus Triple Toss, though. It's kind of interesting. If you examine this table closely, you'll see there's not a single composition that has a winning record in every single matchup. So rather than asking what the best 3v3 comp is, we're going to have to be a little more precise with our wording. Given all we've explored so far, I think it's fair to make the following statements. Given a game with 6 random players with this data set who all pick random, the most desirable comp is PPZ and the least desirable is TTT. I like this wording, actually. This is good wording. For any composition, it is always possible for the other team to pick a comp that counters it. Having multiple Terrans sucks. So true. Not having a Zerg almost always sucks if the other team has one. Also very true. Yeah, we didn't really look at that, but I mean, this is kind of an own thing. If you don't have a Zerg and they have a Zerg, win rate drops drastically, just naturally. That's not very satisfying. And it turns out this still isn't the whole story. Some of you are probably wondering, what happens if we control for the skill level of each team? After all, Protoss dominates at the lower levels of 1v1, but gets flame broiled at the very top end of the ASL SSL, while Terran and Zerg seem roughly even up to the very top, but struggle more at lower levels. How do these numbers look if we include only games from the top players? To see that, we're going to have to define how we decide who the top players are. While we can easily filter by ladder MMR, ASL, SSL games to see high-level 1v1 games, there's no such equivalence for 3v3 BGH. The only 3v3 ladder currently running is a 3v3 BGH MMR bot on Europe, which, while excellent, isn't particularly useful for filtering for high-level games. Very true. In practice, the top end of MMR bot is more a measure of how well you can carry weak teammates, rather than who can play well when all 6 players are very strong. Furthermore, many of the best BGH players don't play the MMR bot games at all, so when it comes to player rating, we're going to have to roll on our own. For simplicity, I'm going to use a system very similar to the ELO system used in chess, but with some tweaks specific to 3v3. First, I'm going to keep track of 3 ratings for each player instead of 1. Each player will get a separate rating for each of their Terran, Zerg, and Protoss, starting at 1500 MMR. For each game, I'll calculate the average MMR for each team, and use that to calculate how many points to add/subtract for each win defeat. If you want more details on how ELO is calculated, see here. We're not going to check it out. Games will be analyzed chronologically from the date they were played. Once we have these ratings, I'll calculate the average MMR for each game across all 6 players and take the top 20% rated games for each matchup. I'll then show the exact same matchup charts as above, but filtered only for those elite games. For players with multiple aliases, I'll assign all games to a single alias where possible. For fun, here's what the MMR distribution for each race looks like. If you've never seen a box whisker plot before, the box represents the 25th to 75th percentile of ratings. The line inside the box is the median, and the whiskers at the end are the maximum and minimum ratings in the dataset minimum 30 games played. Top of the box is 75th, bottom is 25th. Zerg players are too good. Zerg OP. First, let's look at the updated win rate per composition table. I'll put it side by side with unfiltered 1 for comparison. PPZ is still on top, but it's now in a dead even heat with PZZ. Meanwhile, ZZZ gets a huge glow up, going from a 48% win rate to almost 59%. Three of the top 4 spots are now occupied by compositions with at least 2 Zergs. Isn't it funny, by the way, that I was so torn between PPZ and PZZ when you asked me? Isn't that something interesting? It makes me feel better. Alright, now we're going to look up the matchup matrix for high level. Alright, so we'll look at PPZ and PZZ. Kind of want to compare the two, right? Because they're pretty close. So PPZ and PZZ versus PPT, right? Slightly favored for the double Zerg version, but not by much. I think this makes sense. So, to me, PPZ, this is the way this plays out. Very similar to PZZ, but less reliable, basically. In PPZ, you have the double Zealots, right? Plus the Lings to fight the other 2 Protosses, right? So you're guaranteed map control early to get cannons. Now, based on spawns, if Terran is sure choke with Protoss, this composition gets really, really weak. Because the Marines will always be able to fight with the Zealots now, and that makes this incredibly hard for PPZ. So I think if I had to guess, most of the difference between these two is, did Terran get shared choke with a Protoss? It could be just that they got it more here. But I think here, with double Zerg, it's just going to be like an overwhelming amount of lings early. And it's just much easier to guarantee getting cannons up, I think, from your one Protoss. Or if they just get to Dragoons, Dragoons are very, very powerful. Like, Dragoons will always be reliable here. So this is probably Dragoons are more consistent. Cannons I could see being more consistently going up. And here, if it's shared choke with Terran, I think it's really, really difficult for PPZ. So that would be my guess as to what's happening there. That being said, it's funny. I say PPZ is better. PZZ actually has a really good win rate against it. It's only 48 games, but win rate overall actually pretty high. Okay, this is actually where a lot of their advantage comes from then. Against PTT, we have an extra 12% win rate over this. And to me, the reason would be because Terran Bio against double Zerg, very, very strong. Terran Bio against double Protoss, not very strong. It's all pretty interesting. It's good stuff. This seems a little less ambiguous. PPZ absolutely crushes any comp with a Terran in it, but has substantially losing records against PZZ and TZZ. Terran Zerg has a winning record in all matchups for which we have sufficient data, but struggles against PZZ over a small sample. This, to me, is because goons are just kind of superior to vultures in the beginning, and tanks early are just not good. I think that's why Protoss with double Zerg is slightly better than Terran with double Zerg. Vulture's obviously very good against lings, but I think in general, you also are likely to be able to cannon in the Protoss or the Terran against the Terran. Like if the Protoss makes Zealots, you're just going to cannon in the Terran 100% of the time. PZZ also has a winning record in all matchups, with the only potential weakness being versus Triple Toss, though we have only 12 games in the sample. Conclusion. So it's the strongest composition in 3v3 BGH. It's PZZ, and here's why. It doesn't have any weaknesses. If you know the other Terran the other team has a Terran, PPZ is the way to go, since it simultaneously guarantees early game map control like PZZ, just with a stronger economy. This is why PPZ has the overall highest win percentage. It dominates any top of the Terran in it. However, it's hard to rank at number 1 when it has such a losing record in 2 different matchups. While PZZ has an overall lower win rate versus Terran comps, it still crushes them, plus it has a winning record in every single matchup for which we have sufficient data. The only possible weakness indicated in the data is Triple Toss, 33% high-level games, but only over a sample of 12 games. TZZ is a good second option since it's favored versus everything except PZZ. So here's my final rankings. This is Soviet's final rankings. I put PPZ in 3rd. Wow. Wow. I can kind of see why, though. I followed the logic. So here we go. This is Soviet's take. I can't believe triple Terrans at the bottom. Never would have thought. Do I agree with this? PZZ, TZZ, PPZ. TZZ over PPZ. Do I agree with that? I guess if you're... Yeah, okay. I see why. I see the thought process. So it's just the overall has a more winning record, like in overall matchups, right? And whereas PPZ is pretty inflated because of the win rates versus the Terrans, whereas we like plummet in the other matchups. So I understand this thought process. And if you think of it that way, it's actually very logical. So we're like, yeah, okay. I can agree with that. Yeah. It's a more consistent like race composition, right? So if you're looking at it in like terms of consistency, that actually makes a lot of sense. Which I think would be more important, because essentially it's saying with less bad luck and better execution, this race should play better overall, or this composition. If you made it this far, thanks for reading, and I'll see you in the next one. Written by S Kingdom Brood War with 0 followers. I don't have an account, so I won't follow either. Alright, well, I think this is a really good article. Like, really, really good. I pretty much agree with everything. I think the data is like really well done. It's presented like super well, and it makes it very hard to argue with any of the points that you've made. It's interesting because, in general, everything's pretty much as I expected. But I've been playing for so long. There's like a few things that definitely surprised me. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like very, very interesting. Very good article. Alright, that's going to do it for me. We're at 1:30 a.m. My voice is completely shot. I think this was a nice read.